Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's Partner Web Conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Supply Chain Management Tech Talk. Today's topic, the basics of MRP. My name is Janice and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams Live Events and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. Participation in the meeting today does indicate your consent to being included in the meeting recording. Attendees may access the web conference recording via a link that will be delivered by email within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, you can use the Q&A panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. Our presenters are standing by to respond to your questions throughout the session. Now, on to the presentation. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Senior Solution Architect Sachin Gandhi. So without any further delay, Sachin, the floor is all yours.
Hey, thanks, Janice. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this fast track session on basics of master planning. What we'll be looking at today is some key concepts around master planning. What is the configuration that is required for setting up master planning in Dynamics 365? And also, what are some of the guidance that we will talk through that based on our experiences implementing master planning at various customers. What we won't be covering specifically today is advanced planning scenarios. We plan to do a tech talk later on some advanced planning scenarios, and we won't be specifically going into demand forecasting and forecast planning, as we also plan to do a specific session around demand forecasting. All right, so moving on to the agenda, we will look at the master planning overview, what master planning is, what it can do, and then we will look at what are some of the considerations you have to think through in terms of setting up master planning and the setup required. We'll be going into the concepts of coverage group, so coverage settings that are required, and then we will kind of do a demonstration of how to set up master planning and how to run a master plan and look at the plan orders that it generates. All right, so let's get started with master planning overview. So what is master planning? So master planning to me is basically the process by which we balance our demand and supply, or in other words, our receipts and our issues. So master planning will get input based on the setup that we will do in the 365. It will get input from the gross requirements. So if you're kind of doing some forecast planning or inputting your demand for the coming months, then master planning will take that gross requirement into account. It will look at the demand originating from sales orders, also from production line. So if you're producing something and you need raw materials to produce or manufacture those parts, then master planning will look at what's the demand for those raw materials and take that into account as well. And master planning will also look at what existing purchase orders you have with your vendors, what's the supply that's coming in through those purchase orders, and what are you already producing, and what is the expected supply from those production orders that will be coming in. And master planning will calculate based on all those inputs the net requirements to say what is required and when, and then it will generate a plan to ensure that there is enough supply at those enough supply at the right time, so that your supply chain is balanced. All right, master planning is integrated in with a lot of various modules in Dynamics 365. So if you look at organization administration, that's where you will set up your calendars. So you basically define what times your business is operating, what times it's not, what time a warehouse is operating, what time it's not, what time a production facility is operating, what time it's not. So master planning can take that calendar into account while doing its scheduling. Organization administration is also where you go define your machines and your resources. Sales and marketing, that's where you will go and create your quotations and sales orders, and that's the demand signal for master planning. master planning will look at your inventory in the inventory and warehousing management modules to figure out how much inventory you got at which warehouse, so it understands what already you have on hand, what's needed at what warehouse at what time, and take those input into its account while calculating the net requirement. It will also look at the production control module. It's actually heavily integrated with the production control module. So it will be looking at what existing production orders you have, what's the supply coming in through those production orders, as well as it will be generating planned production orders and doing scheduling on your manufacturing resources, on your machines and your human resources. So it's very heavily integrated with production control. Also, product information management, that's where you are going and defining your items, the products that master planning will be planning on. So that's also heavily integrated. There are lots of settings in the product information management module that we'll be looking at today that you will have to set up in terms of supporting master planning. And account receivable, again, that's where your customers live, that's where your sales orders live. So it's heavily integrated there, as well as accounts payable. So that's where your purchase orders and your vendors live. So it's also integrated with accounts payable. All right, so when master planning runs, the output of master planning is planned orders. So master planning will determine what the net requirement is, and then based on the setup, it will generate planned orders indicating that, hey, there is a need for additional supply, and it will create those planned orders as a way to kind of say, hey, you need to look at these planned orders and form it in terms of ensuring that the supply would be there at the right time, at the right place. So the types of planned orders that MRP generates is either planned purchase orders, planned production orders, or it could be transfer orders. So if you have inventory in one warehouse and the other warehouse needs it, then it might just create a transfer order to say transfer some inventory between warehouses. Or if you're using the lean manufacturing module, then it could also generate planned Kanban orders. Master planning runs kind of in two modes, regenerative versus net change. In a regenerative mode, it's basically starting from a clean slate, so it will delete all the previously existing plan orders, and it will basically start planning from scratch and regenerate from scratch, create all the plan orders again. In a net change mode, it's basically only looking at, based on the last regenerative run, what are the changes that have occurred in the system, and then adjust the existing plan and just make the net changes on top of that. So typically customers use a combination of static plan and a dynamic plan strategy. So in a static plan, you can say that, okay, I have a plan that I maybe run once a week, and that's my static plan. I plan in a regenerative mode, basically planning from scratch everything. And then as some small changes occur, new sales orders come in or new purchase orders are created, I just go and run the dynamic plan to kind of make the net change to my plan. So you can set up multiple plans. One plan you will designate as your static plan, and then you will run it more of like your operating plan at a lesser frequency, and a dynamic plan is the one that you will run to kind of adjust to changes in your demand and supply as you go. Okay, so let's look at some planning considerations and setup. So when you're thinking about setting up MRP, I think what you need to think through is what is the input, all the input that you need to provide to master planning, and what is the output that you're expecting, and then what are some of the considerations you need to make in terms of setting up MRP. So let's take a look at that, and then we will go into look at the master planning parameters form and the master plans form, and look at what settings are available for us to adjust. Okay, so the first thing we need to make sure is that we have all the items that we need to plan for set up in the system. And if we are setting up those items, then we have to also think through to understand how far down the line do we want to actually plan for that item. Are we planning only for 30 days from today? Are we planning for 2 months from today? Or are we planning for the next 6 months? And that will depend on the item. So if you have some long lead time items which take a lot of time to acquire from your vendors, you might want to set that item up with a longer time fence in terms of planning, so you can at least get your plan orders ahead in time, and you have enough time to acquire that material from the vendor. You might have certain items that are very costly, so you may not want to buy them well in advance and keep them in inventory because your inventory carrying cost will be higher. So there would be a lot of things you will have to think through related to your products and items that you will store in inventory to say, okay, how do you want to plan for each of those items? And based on that, what either you will come up with is basically a grouping of items that would have similar planning needs, and you will bundle the settings for those in a coverage group. Or you might have certain items that don't actually fit in the group, and you might be able to go and overwrite some of those master planning settings in item coverage, which is specific to that individual item. Master planning will take into account what warehouses you have and what is the inventory, on-hand inventory in those warehouses. It will take a look at the calendars you have set up, operating hours for your warehouses, for your manufacturing locations. And then it will also take a look at dimensions like your site, your warehouse, your product dimensions like your size, color, configuration. And it will look at your existing sales orders, purchase orders, production orders. It could also look at your quotations. And based on all of that input, it will go and generate planned purchase orders or planned production orders or planned transfer orders. So I think all these things we have to make sure that we have actually set up in the system, thought through before we start configuring master planning. The other considerations you have to make is, okay, how is the demand signal for a particular product going to come from? Is that product something customers are ordering well in advance, allowing you enough time to then go and acquire the raw material needed or source that item from a vendor? Or you need to basically do some forecasting because you don't have enough time and customers are only placing their orders a few days in advance. So that's where you have to think through whether you want to do forecast scheduling and input a forecast to the system or not, because master planning will then determine if would use that forecast for generating the plan orders. You also have to think through your inventory levels. What are the appropriate inventory levels for the items? You don't want to order too much because you may not have enough space in your warehouse, and you may have inventory sitting for a long time. You may not want to order too little, risking the possibility of a stock out, or also not being able to deliver your sales orders on time. And you probably want to spend some time is to say what will be the optimum inventory levels for the various items, and then configure accordingly. And then you have to also think through is how many times you're going to run master planning. Are you going to use kind of a one plan or a two plan strategy? Maybe I just run planning once a week or once every 2 weeks, or I run master planning every day. And I use a static plan and a dynamic plan. So that's what I think you will have to think through is how often do you want to do planning and what kind of strategy you need in terms of executing master planning. This diagram here shows the various things you will have to set up. What is the prerequisites? What are some of the required things, and what are some of the optional things? So from a prerequisite standpoint, we need calendars for our resources, our warehouses, our production facilities set up, so master planning would know exactly when we are operating, when we are not. We need to make sure our account receivable module is fully set up. That's where our customers live. We'll have to make sure accounts payable is set up, and the vendors are defined for all the items that we need to source. Product information management, that's where you're creating your release products and the various settings on the release product. For example, the coverage group default on that. And you'll have to make sure your inventory management module is fully set up. Warehouses are defined, the sites are defined. If you are doing any forecasting, then forecast models are defined. And then on the master planning side, you need to make sure that you have journal names defined for item coverage. You have, if you're using forecast plans, then forecast plans are defined. Obviously, you have to create your master plans to run master planning. You will have to make sure coverage groups are defined, and then items are associated with those coverage groups. And then you'll have to make sure that the master planning parameters form is set up so that master planning will use those parameters when it executes. And then there are a lot of optional settings in here. So if you're doing intercompany planning, you got multiple legal entities, one legal entity is sourcing from the other, and you want to basically plan both the legal entities together, then you will have to set up intercompany planning groups. We will talk about minimum and maximum keys and the various setups required here in a minute. But there's a lot of setup, but this is a good diagram to kind of reference when we are logically trying to set up master planning. All right, so master planning parameters form. If you go to this master planning parameters form, the first setting here is disable all planning processes. This setting applies to customers who don't plan to use master planning. So if you're not planning to not using master planning and don't plan to use it in the near future, then you might want to toggle this to yes. What it will do is it will save the system some cycles where it's basically calculating some net requirements on the fly as you're creating your sales orders, your purchase orders, stuff like that. So it won't do that thinking that you might be using master planning and it needs to keep all of that data. It will stop doing that, and then it will help with performance in other areas. So you may want to keep that off if you're not using master planning. If you're using master planning, definitely make sure it's turned off. Then on the master planning parameters form, you set up, what is your default kind of forecast plan? What is your static master plan, and what is your dynamic master plan? And what is your default coverage group? And these settings basically are just defaults. There is also a time you're specifying to say what is the time in a day. So that will be used to say, hey, something's delayed or something's not delayed. So if something's happening before 10 a.m. here, then it will be considered it's arriving on time. If something's happening after 10 a.m., then it will say, okay, it's actually getting delayed. So let's say if your cutoff for shipping is at 3 p.m. In the afternoon, you might want to set this at 3 p.m. Otherwise, the delivery will be considered the next day. So we'll look at some of these as we go into the demo. So this screen is showing the screen where you go and define your various plans, master plans. So I've created, or the demo data has 3 master plans here, one called static plan, and you have settings up here. So for example, whether you want to use your on-hand inventory from a planning standpoint, and if you want to do that, then yes, the default setting is yes. And here is also a setting that says consume all the on-hand inventory before looking at other supplies. So we don't want to create purchase orders against your vendors if you already got inventory on hand. So that's why this setting needs to be on. If you want to include quotations, Then you can also include quotations, and you can provide a probability value to say what is the probability of those quotations getting converted into a sales order. So master planning will only use that certain percentage of the demand coming from sales quotation in that case. We also specify whether you want to use operation scheduling and job scheduling. We'll talk about that in a minute. And also whether you want to do your capacity planning based on finite capacity or infinite capacity. So if your production is constrained by the capacity of your production, how much you can produce at your manufacturing plant, and you are usually constrained by that, then you might want to keep it turned on. But if you usually don't have a bottleneck in your manufacturing facility, then you might want to just keep that off, because master planning will be spending a lot of calculation time in terms of capacity planning unnecessarily then. And we'll talk about time fences. So there's a lot of things where you have to define how far down the line you want to do certain things from a planning standpoint. So finite capacity time fence is defined here. You will see there's a bunch of fields under the time fences in days kind of tab here. We'll talk about that, as well as the how far down the line you want to look at what's getting delayed, and how far down the line you're basically generating action messages. So we'll look at that in a minute.
Sachin, if I may interject with a question from the audience.
Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding the MRP inputs, does MRP account for costs involved in transferring between warehouses as opposed to or versus the cost of purchasing directly from a warehouse that requires the item?
No, that's where you will set up your sourcing policy for a certain warehouse. So if you have warehouse A and warehouse B, and if you are going and basically setting up a policy for master planning to say my sourcing policy for warehouse A is to source from warehouse B, then it will always try to source from warehouse B. It won't at that point try to determine whether it's cheaper for me to just go and acquire it from a vendor versus go get it from the other warehouse. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so operation scheduling versus job scheduling. So when we are doing planning ahead of time, we may only want to do a rough planning when it comes to determining what day a production order will start and what day it will end. You may only want to talk in terms of days rather than exact times to say what exact time it's starting on. So that's kind of the rough planning. But when we move on to the job scheduling side, master planning will plan for saying what exact time on a particular day an operation will start and when it will end, what exact time it will end. It will also go down to the level of saying what exact machine would it be running on. So if you got a group of machines on the operation scheduling side, it will only look at capacity for the entire group and basically say, do we have enough capacity to plan for the production on that day? Versus on the job scheduling side, it will actually try to determine which machine inside that group of machines I need to go and schedule this particular production order on. So that's the difference between operation scheduling and job scheduling. So you could have different master plans defined. In some master plans, you basically just do operation scheduling, kind of a rough cut, and then you might have a master plan, kind of shorter duration master plan that does the detail level of scheduling with job scheduling. Okay, let's move on to coverage groups. So coverage groups is basically a set of settings that you can define at a group level and then associate multiple items to that group. So you don't have to go define different coverage settings for individual items. You just define them at a group level and then associate that group with different items. And what coverage groups kind of help us is to kind of say how far down the line I'm planning, and what are the things I'm planning, and so for example, if you're doing capacity planning, are you doing capacity planning for the next 2 weeks, next 4 weeks? Those are the kind of settings you'll be going and defining at the coverage group level. And you will create different coverage groups because different items will need different types of coverage. Some items could be long lead time, like I talked about, and you might want to have it associated with the coverage group that is looking at a longer term planning. There might be certain items that you can acquire pretty quickly from your vendors, and you might want to keep them as part of a separate coverage group that you plan a little bit differently for. And a lot of considerations will go in, for example, monetary value of an item, all the high value items you might want to plan as part of a separate coverage group versus if you're doing an ABC classification, your C-level items could go as part of a different coverage group. It will also be important to, if you're a manufacturing company, and if your items have bills of materials, then it will be important for you to understand whether you're only planning at the finished good level or you're actually going down to the raw material level also. And those will be the parameters on the coverage group that we will be setting to say, hey, how far down the line do we want to explode these bombs, and use that as part of planning. If we are using capacity planning, then that will be based on the route. Look at what resources are needed for a particular operation and try to do the capacity planning around those. But here's the way you will control how far down the line you want to plan those things out. And also similarly, how far down the line you want to calculate where something's delayed or something could be optimized. And that's the action messages and the delays calculation, how far down the line you want to do that, and how planned production orders are managed. So that's where your sourcing policies and things like that, whether it's a purchased item, whether it's a produced item, or whether you want to transfer it from a different warehouse, those settings will be defined at a coverage group level. So here is a form where we define the different coverage groups. So you can see I have a coverage group defined here for a 20-day period, and then I have another one for 1-day period. So planning items that I'm only planning at a 1-day level could go in the period 1, and items that are planning at a 20-day period then could go in the 20-day period. So the first setting that is important on a coverage group is the coverage code. And there are a few different coverage codes. We will talk about it in the next slide. But what I want you to pay attention here is the coverage time frames, okay? And then negative days and positive days. All these settings we have to define on the coverage group form. Bomb explosion, how far down the line we are doing that. Capacity scheduling time frames, how far down the line we are doing that. If we are doing automatic firming of production orders, then how many days ahead of time we do that. If we are freezing certain planned production orders, how far down the line we do that. So all these settings are defined at a coverage group level. Similarly, how far down the line we are doing action messages and delay messages is also defined at a group level, and then you will associate this group to individual items. We will see that in a demo. Okay, so let's talk about coverage code. So different items you might want to have a different strategy in terms of how you source it. So let's say you have an item that gets sold multiple times in a period of a week, 7 days here. So some items getting deduced from inventory here, then here, and then from here. So that will bring our inventory down from a safety stock level. So when you have the coverage code set to a period, and you have the period defined, and in this case, the period is defined as 7 days, what master planning will basically look at is buckets of 7 days in the future. What's the demand for those 7 days? And to make sure that that demand is met by supply, it will create one supply at the beginning of the period. So here is one supply that satisfies the requirement during this 7-day period. And then there is another supply or another planned production or purchase order that will supply for the demand in the second period here. Okay. So you have a coverage time frame that covers 2 weeks or 14 days, and you have 2 periods in that 14-day, and we have one supply per period. So that's what a period does. So if you want to have certain things that you order on a weekly basis, that probably will be the mode where you set the coverage group with a coverage code of period and the period duration being 7 days. If you plan something at a monthly basis, then you might have a coverage code of type period with a coverage period set to 30 days. And the second type of coverage code is a requirement, and this is probably the most straightforward one. And what this says is if I have a demand for a certain item on a certain date, create a supply for that date. So create a specific plan order to meet the demand for that day. And then similarly, so if let's say we have 3 sales order, one on this date, one on this date, and one on this date in the timeline, then each one will have an equal supply planned on the same day, sort of. So that's the easiest, but it may not be practical for certain items. And then coverage code, where you are basically setting the minimum and maximum. So what you're saying is anytime you see that the inventory will fall below 50 pieces here, then reorder 100 pieces. Okay, so it will fill up to the max, and then it will look at when it's dropping below the minimum, and when it drops below the minimum, it will make sure that it gets resupplied and fulfilled to the maximum level. And that's where you will go and define your minimum and maximum quantities, either at a group level or at an individual item level. And we will look at that in the demo soon. So we talked about the different time fence settings that are there on the coverage group. This diagram here helps us understand how those settings come into play when master planning is executing. So let's start from the bottom. So coverage. So this is basically the duration when master planning is running. It's looking at that time frame. So if we are setting coverage to be 60 days, then master planning is looking at the next 60 days in terms of what it needs to plan for the next 60 days. Explosion time fence. So here in this diagram, it's kind of matching the coverage time frame, which means what MRP will understand is like if I'm planning for the next 60 days, if I find an item that has a bill of material, I will also go and explode that bill of material and also plan for the components that are there in the bill of material and the raw materials that are there are required for the bill of material. So I will also do that for the 60 days, but you could have set this to half of this, which would be 30 days to say, okay, look at the finished good coverage for the next 60 days, but only explode bond for the next 30 days. Capacity. So your production capacity from operation and job scheduling standpoint, how far down the line master planning is considering the capacity. So you may want to keep that set to what your needs would be, but this will definitely be shorter than what your coverage time fence is. So everything should be shorter than what your coverage time fence is, because it doesn't make sense to have any of these above greater than what the coverage time fence is. Action messages and future messages, how far down the line you want to know if something's getting delayed. So if something's getting delayed a month from now, do you want to know that today or just 10 days in advance? Because what you're considering there is, do you want to have too many delayed messages? Because I guess from supply chain, too many things could be delayed if you're looking at a longer horizon, and it will be a lot of noise. So you may want to kind of have a shorter duration in terms of what you're looking at from a future messages standpoint. Action messages, those are telling you how you want to optimize your supply chain. So again, that period will definitely be shorter than your coverage period, but that's what you have to consider is how many messages you can practically deal with and have the action messages time fence set accordingly. Freeze time fence will help you to make sure that you're not changing something in the near term. So if you have planned production or purchase orders for the next few days, and somebody's already looking at and considering forming those, you may not want to keep changing those as you re-execute your master plan. So you might want to define a freeze time fence, and when you define a freeze time fence, master planning won't change those plan orders and actually plan, assuming that those existing plan orders will become actual orders and plan accordingly on top of that. Firming time fence. So if you actually are kind of going on autopilot and letting master planning go and firm some of your orders, then the firming time fence is also what you can define. So on the coverage group, there was also a setting, two settings, one to define positive days and one to define negative days. So let's talk about positive days first. So when we are defining the setting for positive days, what that means is how far down the time frame from when a sales order is due, we will look at to see if there is a purchase order that will supply for the demand generated by that sales order. So in this case, let's say we have a sales order to be delivered 6 days from today, and we have a purchase order that's coming in 2 days from today. And if we're setting the positive days, let's say to 3, then master planning will say, hey, if there is a demand, I'm looking 3 days backward to see if there is a supply. And in this case, it won't find any because there's nothing between here and here in the 3 days. So it will say, OK, I need to generate a new planned production order or a purchase order to ensure that there is supply for this sales order. So in that case, it will go and generate a new, let's say, purchase order. But if you're setting your positive days, let's say to any number greater than 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 here, then it will be able to take this purchase order and say, OK, this purchase order can't satisfy the demand for this sales order. So in this case, it would go in and say, OK, that's fine. Maybe what you want to do from an actual message standpoint is postpone this purchase order so it gets delivered here, so you are not holding inventory on hand and it's just sitting around for 4 days. Similarly, on the negative day side, what we are saying is, all right, I know I have a sales order that I need to deliver on day 6 from today, and I don't have any supply for it, but maybe there is a supply coming 3 days later on day 9. And instead of creating a new supply for that sales order, I would want to just consider the supply coming in through that P2 purchase order on day 9. And my sales order might be delayed by 3 days, but that's OK. I don't want to generate another purchase order. So in that case, MRP will balance the demand here with the supply coming from P2, but you will have to make sure that at least then the negative days is set to 3. Because there is a 3-day difference between this. The way I kind of look at it, because sometimes negative versus positive, if you look at this number line, it kind of goes in the other direction, what we are usually used to, where we have negative numbers on this side and positive numbers on this side, is to kind of look at to say sales date minus the ship date minus the receipt date. So if that number comes out to being negative, then how much is that number, and that much will have to be the quantity set on the negative days in order for us to allow that. Otherwise, it won't consider it. Same thing will happen from a positive day standpoint, sales date minus the receipt date, and whatever that difference is, we'll have to make sure that the positive days is usually that. Usually what people do is they set a negative days to be a quantity of 1 or 2. Because usually if you have a purchase order getting delivered 1 or 2 days when the sales order is due, maybe you can tolerate a day or 2 of delay in your sales order, and that's probably fine. And that's why you keep that quantity to be small. The positive days, you kind of will keep it kind of large because you want to consider any purchase order coming in before that sales order to supply to meet the demand. All right. Then on the coverage group, you have a lot of other settings for safety margins and lead times. So let's take a look at how those settings actually affect when the purchase order is going to be created. So let's say we have a sales order that we need to ship on day 25. But if we set up a safety margin for issue of 5 days, then what master planning will do is we'll actually see that demand instead of on the 25th day 5 days in advance on the 20th day. Okay, so it will move that demand 5 days ahead in time, and it will say, okay, I need to satisfy that demand here on day 20. But you also have a receipt safety margin. Then it will again say, okay, I know the demand is here, but I need to receive the material at least 5 days in advance to maintain safety net. So it will move the receipt date to day 15 here. And if you have a 5-day lead time to acquire that material from the vendor, then master planning will understand that, okay, the purchase order needs to be sent 5 days in advance. So it will move it to day 10. And if you have a reorder safety margin also, then it will say, okay, you actually need to create that purchase order another 5 days in advance to move that here on the 5th. So it will see with these safety margins of 20 days when your demand is actually there and when the purchase order needs to be placed to maintain those safety margins, it will add that slack in the system. So you don't have you can maintain those safety net and you don't have stock out or delays in receipt from the vendors, and still your supply chain working fine.
And on that note, we have 20 minutes of safety margin here to accommodate your demo, and we have a lot of questions piling up. So,
okay, I'll try to speed up a little bit. Okay. So something quick on the action messages. So in this diagram, what we could see is we have a production order starting here, and we have raw material getting delivered here from the purchase order, and we will be producing things in advance and we'll be keeping them on hand. So action messages are helping us kind of to say how can we optimize our supply chain. So it's saying why produce this in advance? Let's move this. Let's delay this this production order by this much time here, and also delay this purchase. So we are not holding finished good inventory on hand for a longer time. So that's what action messages are kind of helping us do. If you're looking at delayed messages, so anytime there is a delay, let's say vendor calls and says, hey, I won't be able to deliver this purchase order in time, it will be delayed by certain days, and master planning notices that, okay, if you're getting your raw material here, then you will be only able to start your production here, and the production based on the production times will finish here, then there will be this much delay, and it will generate a future or a delayed message for you to look at. So if you have delayed messages turned on, you will be able to see based on the planning what are the things that are getting delayed, and you might be able to take some action on top of that to prevent the delay, or at least inform your customer to say, hey, our shipment to you might be delayed. This diagram is kind of saying the same thing. Let's say a sales was planned at this point, so the supply was also planned on this time. But if the supply is getting delayed, then master planning will tell you that your sales order is also going to get delayed, and the sales order will have a future message on it. Okay, so let me quickly cover coverage settings, and then we'll go into the demo. So, so coverage group, you're kind of defining settings at a group level, but you could actually also go down into item coverage and then override some of the settings you have defined at a group level at individual item level. So let's take a look at that in a demo quickly. And you can also have a safety stock journal in Dynamics 365 where you can go and define safety stock level for different items at different sites and warehouses. And the system will try to ensure that whatever demand is there, it will add the demand from the safety stock. And basically when it generates the plan order quantities will be adjusted based on the safety stock quantities and your existing demand as well. So we can define these coverage settings at a master planning parameters form, which is basically where they apply to default setting for everything. And then those default settings we can override at the release products form. That's where we select what coverage group we need for the item. And so that's at the group level. And then item coverage helps us define these coverage settings at an individual item level. Okay, so I'll cover this. I'll show you going into item coverage and manipulating some settings there and looking at the results in master planning. And then there is a safety stock journal. You can go and define your journal line. So here I have an item H100, and I can say for site 1, warehouse 11, my safety stock is 10. So master planning will add that into its calculation and make sure that it maintains that safety stock. Okay, so let me jump into the demo quickly. All right. All right, let me just refresh my browser. Okay. So what I've done for the demo is I've set up some few simple products here. So I have a product named S101 that I have set up. It's a purchase order. So if I go into default order setting, it's the default order type is purchase orders. And I have also set up another item here called H100, which is the one that I want to demo from a manufacturing standpoint. So it has a default order type of production. And if I look at I have two. I have a bill of material defined for H100 with two items R001 and R002 underneath that bill of material. So what I want to do now is basically create some demand for these two items, S101 and the H100 item. So I'll go and create a new sales order. I'll say, let's say I want to have 500 or let's say 400 of these. And then I want to create H100 and I say I want to have 10 of these in my sales order. Okay, so we just created a, okay, I need to fill out site. Okay, so I just created a sales order with these two items, signaling some demand for these two items. So now let me go into master planning and I will go and execute master planning. And for this demo, I've just put in a filter to just plan for those 4 items that I'm actually concerned about right now. So master planning is running. It's using all the setup, looking at the demand, and I have no on-hand inventory for this. So this is kind of a simple thing for master planning to run and generate some demand. So if I look at S101, now master planning has generated a planned purchase order of 5,000. I'll talk about why it generated for 5,000 and not for the 400 quantity that I put into, because what we have done at an S101 item level, let's take a look at it here in the release products form, is we have defined an item coverage specific to S101, where we are setting up the coverage code to be min max. So what we are saying is anytime my inventory falls below 500, I want to create a planned order for 5,000. Okay, so if I were to uncheck this override, so let me clear these two. Check this override, then it will default back to the coverage group that's set up on that item master. So if I look at S101 on the plan tab, I have a coverage group of type group. And if I run master planning now, you will see that now it's only generating a planned purchase order for those 400 items, not for the 2000. So that's how you can influence how you want your planned production orders to be generated. I could again change that coverage group from group to requirement, and if I have 2 sales orders on 2 different dates, I will see 2 different purchase orders for that. Or you can have a coverage period defined there to say I want to plan for 15 days, and any demand in that 15 days gets clubbed into a single plan order, and master planning can do that for you. Looking at the item H100, you'll see I'd created sales order with quantity 10, so it's creating a planned production order for H100 for quantity 10. But since I have the explosion time fence covering the bill of material for H100, I'm also getting a demand for that raw material being considered by master planning. It's also generating a purchase order for that raw material. Same thing for R002. So that's how master planning basically is taking your item setup, what coverage group you have defined on the item, or if you have item coverage defined on that individual item into account in terms of generating either your planned purchase order or your planned production order. You can also, at a coverage group level, define all these different settings to control how far down the line you're planning and how far down the line you want to generate or explode bombs or do capacity planning. So let's take a look at safety stock quickly. So here I have, I'm in the safety stock journal. I've created a safety stock journal, and I'm just adding a line to it. So I have added H100 at site 1, warehouse 11. I have a minimum requirement of 10, so I want to maintain a safety stock of 10. Let me go and post this journal. Okay, and now if I run master planning, and look at the requirement for H100, you would see that it has now created 2 requirements, for one to satisfy my sales order with demand of 10 and one to satisfy my safety stock for 10. I could change the coverage setting on these 2. So instead of generating 2 separate plan orders for 10 and 10, it could go and generate 1 plan order with the quantity of 20. You don't have to necessarily do it at that level. It will be nice if MRP just did it for you, but if you are a person who is actually responsible for firming those production orders, could actually then select both of these 2 and also manually go and group them together. So it becomes 1 production order, 1 planned production order with a quantity of 20. So you can do that with purchase order, transfer orders, production orders alike. All right, I think we can probably stop here and take some questions. Rick, how do you want to do this? You want to read and then I answer, or?
I think I have an echo when I talk, so if you can pull the questions up, that'd probably be ideal.
Okay. So I'm looking at the Q&A panel. Let me read through this. Will you be able to share the PPT? Yes, definitely. We will share the PPT. Okay, then let's look at the new tab. Okay, static plan is operations plan and dynamic plan is job plan. If static plan is copied to dynamic plan automatically, how do we attain that dynamic plan is job plan? So what you would probably want to do in that case is to say, if you're doing job planning, you're probably not doing job planning for the same duration for which you're running static plan. So you might want to create a different plan that is using job scheduling, and you run it, like the static plan, and then you have a dynamic plan on top of that static plan to adapt to any changes that happen afterwards. So that's why you don't have to only have two plans, one static, one dynamic. You can have different plans, and you can run each of those, and you can have certain dynamics planned based on certain static plans. Okay, hello, what happened with period coverage if I use a period of 5 days, 5 open days per week, and MRP run each day? On day +4, we have a planned production order for period day +4, day +9, period 5 is okay if I confirm once a week. I'm not exactly sure I understand that question at this point, but I think what I would maybe say is just set it up in a test environment and try it, how it's exactly behaving. That probably will help you get closer to the answer. We may have many variable routes that make it difficult to measure capacity. So if you have many different routes, when you go to a particular sales order, so if I have different routes for H100, let's say, I could then go and at least make sure that on my product page, I have the right route and BOM selected. So when master planning runs, it will take whatever is associated with that particular sales line. So if you're using different routes for that same item, you may want to default it on the sales order, and then master planning will plan based on the route that's associated with that line in the sales order. So yeah, then there's another question from David. Can we run operation schedule and leave the job schedule out to be done manually? Yes. So when you're defining, you could just do master planning based on operation schedule, and when it generates your production order and you form the production order, you can run the job scheduling there on the production order. You don't have to do it as part of master planning necessarily. What is the difference between safety stock journal and the minimum that you set on the item? So that's again a consideration, whether you kind of want to use the minimum from the minimum maximum keys, or you want to use the safety stock journal. If you are using the min-max strategy on the coverage good itself, you could basically consider that you don't have to go and create a separate safety stock journal. You can just control it by the min setting on the min-max coverage group. But if you have items that you have either set with the coverage code of requirement as group level or at a period, then you might also use the safety stock to say safety stock is coming from the safety stock journal, because you're not necessarily defining min and max on those items. Can I effectively plan for my labor in conjugation with material and capacity planning? So that depends on how you're setting up your routes. On your routes, if you are going in and setting up the resource requirement for a particular operation, and then resource requirement, you are specifying what type of machines you need and what type of human resources you need, then yes, MRP will also tell you the capacity needed for the human resources also. So it's treating the machine scheduling as well as human or labor scheduling pretty much the same way. You will have to look at whether your routes are set up with machines as well as the labor is needed for the individual operations, and master planning will take that into account while planning. Is it possible to force MRP to schedule planned activities to start on a specific day of the week? Easy, a cleaning activity every Monday morning. Okay, so in that case also, what you will do is you will set up a route for those activities, and the resources that are needed for that activity, you will go in and specify the working days for those resources in the calendars that are associated with the resource days. So when master planning runs, it would say, okay, I need this resource, but then it will also consider the calendar when the resource is available. So if you have cleaning activities only going on Friday, you'll set up a calendar that's only has working days on Friday. You will associate that calendar with your cleaning resource, and master planning will only plan the cleaning activities on Friday then. Does CTP consider dynamic static plan on the sales order lines? Yes, CTP will consider your dynamic plan. So you'll have a static plan, and then that will get copied to dynamic plan. And when you run CTP, it will consider your dynamic plan for capable to promise functionality in Dynamics. If MRP process gets down before complete, what will be the best way to rerun it? So I think we have done some improvements in the product recently, where if a master plan fails and you rerun it, it can pick up from where it kind of left off, but that depends on what stage it was at when it failed. But the better answer to that is we are actually enabling planning service, which will actually be able to run master planning in a matter of minutes. So even if it fails, you can rerun the whole thing and it will work kind of in minutes. So the whole days where we used to wait hours and hours to run master planning are basically now changing over to where we can run master planning, even large workloads, basically in a matter of minutes. So I have put a link for that. Let me pull up my deck. So if you're interested in the planning optimization service, then I have put in the link here for getting started. We are actually about to go into public preview, but once we go into public preview, you can start using it for distribution workloads, for generating your plan orders, plan purchase order, and your transfer orders. The engineering team is working on getting to parity for the production scenarios also. So look for that in the next few months. We have already worked with a few customers in private preview mode in terms of enabling the planning service for them. And what we have seen is we could go down from very long running MRPs up to like 6 hours, and all those workloads then would be basically be running under a matter of 4 or 5 minutes altogether. And that will enable you to basically also not pay too much attention to whether you want to do run a full static plan or just do dynamic. You might be able to rerun a static plan multiple times during a day because it won't take as long going forward. All right, so that brings me to this slide, additional resources. I have copied a link to the homepage for master planning, and I have also a planning preview. I guess as it goes into public preview in the next few days, you should try it out and see if it meets your workload. And our direction from Microsoft would be to move our customers into the planning optimization service, because that's where you will see a lot of performance gain from an MRP standpoint. All right, I think we are 3 minutes over. Thank you for joining the call today, and hopefully the information shared was good for everyone. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sachin. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a brief moment here and bring your attention to a link that I just posted in the Q&A panel. And that is the link to a short survey for this web conference, and we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference, have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, or you'd like to submit topics for future web conferences, this is your chance to let us know. We do appreciate the time you take to do this, and thank you for your support. And that is going to conclude today's web conference. The recording and a copy of the presentation deck will be available within 5 business days. Please look for an email from Worldwide Learning that will include details on how to access those. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, Sachin and Rich, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.